We spent the rest of that day just wandering pleasantly with the car. But there was one particular call I had to make. There's a lot of difference between the local stores back home and the English village shop. But that wasn't the only reason we were here. This had once been my home, and I mean just that. The coziest, most friendly little billet an airman ever occupied. And dear old Mrs. Jacobs hasn't aged a day, though it seems I must have. Why, yes, of course it's me. I said I'd come back, didn't I? And see what I've brought with me. But business is business, even in rural England. And the customers can't be kept waiting by a sentimental Bluey and his brew. We'll look in on our way back, Mrs. Jacobs, when you have more time. Like every good Australian airman, I was a connoisseur of pubs. And this one I remembered was a beaut. Charlie, the landlord, was still there, and his memory was even better than mine. The governor was genuinely pleased to see me, and Margaret obviously met with his approval, though strictly between you and me, she wasn't the first girl I'd bought a drink for at his bar. But not to worry, Charlie had the right kind of pin-ups on the wall. The old lamp, the old squadron letters. Hey, that reminds me, Charlie. Do you remember the hair razor? Oh, I'd sure like to know what happened to my little car. (1925) Austin 7. Do you ever see it around? I sold it to this garage for a tenner in '43. Oh, well, I suppose it was rather a long time ago. No go, Andy. And that was the finest car we had on the squadron. The wild ponies on Dartmoor came as a delightful surprise to the family. As Margaret said, in a country as small as England, she could never see how there'd ever be room for any wildlife at all. Well, the West Country was going to show her just how wrong she could be. Hey, kiddo, we've not got all day, you know. Despite the fact that we were fairly lucky with the weather, Margaret took none too kindly to the English autumn breezes. But with the Austin, this was no problem, and the heater soon put the warmth we missed into the sunshine we were glad to have. I'd finished up my flying days in coastal command. I have a soft spot for the sea, and this was an opportunity to wander along a coastline I'd known well from the air, but not had much time to explore. Though, of course, I'd been to Mevagissey, and a man doesn't forget a harbour like that in a hurry. Polperro was another little place I was very keen for Margaret to see. And naturally, just as long as they could smell the seaweed, the kids loved it. Yes, it's another pub, but I make no apology to anyone for including the lugger at Portloe in my journey back. Here I dreamed the dreams of a young man and found friendship amongst the old. Not that a Cornish fisherman ever gets old as other men. The bent fingers a shade lower, perhaps, the hard frame a little stooped at the shoulder, but the friendship and welcome as warm as the young in heart. I'll say this of women. They're great hands at doing nothing in particular. But even on holiday, a man needs something to occupy himself. I reckon we must be pretty dull company, son. But if Margaret prefers driving to fishing, that's all right with me. The Westminster, despite its power, has no vices and almost drives itself. The sort of car you feel knows its own way around. The only thing I can think of is that these fish have changed their feeding habits. Though, mind you, there was one monster that came up, and if only you hadn't blown your horn like that. It was harder to leave Cornwall than I'd have thought possible. But when you're travelling in a really good car, the journey itself's a pleasure. And our trip was by no means over yet. Some of these West Country hills used to be the tourists' terror. In the Austin, I hardly ever went below third gear. The spire of Salisbury Cathedral, a landmark for centuries, pointing its delicate finger to the windy skies over the plain. To a visiting Australian family like ours, the peace and ancient dignity of these quiet little corners of England put a real meaning into the words, the old country.